The millionaire's cat led him to a kind woman by the lake. He didn't know she would change his life. Ethan found out Jasper had escaped when he heard the gravel crunching under paws that weren't his. He'd barely cracked the door. Didn't matter. The cat squeezed through like he'd been waiting for exactly that much space and took off across the parking lot without looking back. Ethan said his name. Didn't help. He watched Jasper reach a dirt path at the far end of the lot and disappear into the grass. Just gone. No hesitation. No sniffing around. Moving like he had coordinates. Ethan had a brief back at the hotel. He had 2 calls he'd already pushed to tomorrow. He'd stopped here by accident, really. Some side road near the property site. Thought he'd walk a few minutes before the drive back to Duluth. He was tired in the specific way you get tired when you've been in meetings since morning and your brain hasn't stopped once. He went after the cat. The path through the trees was short. Maybe 3 minutes of walking before it opened up and Ethan stepped out onto the edge of a lake he hadn't known was there. He stopped walking. It was wide. Really wide. The kind of lake that makes you recalibrate your sense of where you are. The sun was coming in low and sideways, and the whole surface had this flat silver look, and the far shore was just trees going dark in the distance. No boats. No sound except the wind. There was a woman on a bench near the water. Blonde hair, loose, the wind moving it around a little. Cream sweater, worn brown boots. She was reading, one leg crossed over the other, completely absorbed. She looked like she'd been sitting there for a while and planned to stay a while longer. Jasper was already next to her. That was the thing. Ethan hadn't even seen him cross the grass. But there he was, sitting on the bench beside her like it was his bench, like she was someone he'd arranged to meet. Not circling her, not being cautious. Just sitting there, pressed against her arm. She looked down at him with this expression, surprised but not startled, like she found it funny more than anything. She closed her book and looked at the cat for a second, then looked up and found Ethan standing at the edge of the trees. "He yours?" she asked. "Unfortunately, yes." That got a real reaction. Not a big laugh, just a short, quiet one. She looked back at Jasper. "He walked over like he knew me. He does that, decides things fast." Her name was Lily. She offered it simply, no production around it. He told her his. She nodded and looked back at the water and didn't push for more, which surprised him a little. Most people asked what he did. Most people wanted something from an introduction. She just went back to the lake. He sat down at the other end of the bench, not entirely sure why. The thing about Ethan's life was that it moved, constantly. Chicago, New York, 3 cities in a week sometimes. Deals and calls and dinners that were really just meetings without a conference table. He was good at it, genuinely good, and most of the time he didn't mind it. But sitting here now with the water in front of him and nothing demanding anything, he noticed the quiet, the way you notice the absence of a noise you'd stopped hearing. His phone was in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. A couple of ducks cut across the near bank. Lily turned a page. Jasper sat between them like he'd organized the whole thing and was pleased with how it turned out. After a while she said, not looking up, "Good spot." "Yeah," Ethan said. He wasn't thinking about the view when he said it. He told himself it was the property that brought him back. There were measurements to double-check on the north side of the parcel, something his project manager had flagged in an email the night before. It made more sense to stay another day in Harlow than drive back to Duluth and turn around in the morning. That was the logic. It held up fine. He parked in the same lot anyway. Jasper was in his carrier this time. That had been a whole thing. The cat had planted himself flat on the hotel bathroom floor and stared at the carrier door like it was a personal insult. Ethan had spent 4 minutes negotiating with an animal that doesn't negotiate before just picking him up and putting him in. She was there. Different book, same bench, same boots. A paper coffee cup sitting on the wood next to her. She looked up when she heard him on the path and her expression did this small thing. Not quite a smile. Just a loosening, like she'd half expected him. "Back again," she said. "One more day. Sight stuff." She looked at the carrier. "You brought him this time." He chewed through a curtain rod at the hotel. This seemed safer. She laughed a little at that, short and real. Let him out. Ethan unlatched the door and Jasper was on the bench in about 3 seconds. Lily put her hand on his back without really thinking about it, the way you'd reach for something familiar, and the cat leaned into her palm and went still. Ethan sat down at his end of the bench. The lake was different in the morning. More light, more movement, the surface broken into small pieces by the wind. Someone was kayaking way out toward the center, just a yellow dot going slow. "You grew up here?" he asked. Born here. Left for college, came back after. You wanted to come back? She paused before answering, which he noticed. I didn't want to be anywhere else, she said. It's a little different from wanting. He thought about that. It was different. He'd never had a place that felt like that. Somewhere you returned to because leaving didn't quite feel right. What do you do? She asked. No particular urgency in it. Real estate, development. I'm looking at a parcel north of town. She nodded the way people nodded when they were listening but not impressed, which was rarer than it should have been in his life. You? He said. Bookstore on Main. She glanced over briefly. Pretty different from land development. Different, yeah, not lesser. She looked at him for a second after that. He couldn't tell what she made of it. Then she looked back at the water. Jasper had moved off her lap and was now walking the full length of the bench like he owned it. He do this with everyone? She asked. No, Ethan said. And it was true. Jasper was not a social cat. He tolerated most people and ignored the rest. Whatever it was about Lily, it was not a general thing. She seemed to take that in without making a big deal of it. They sat quiet for a bit. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kayaker had turned around somewhere out in the middle and was heading back. The coffee cup beside her was nearly empty. There's a place on Main called Greta's, she said after a while. If you need lunch, the soup's worth it when it's cold. Is it cold enough today? She looked at the sky, genuinely considering it. Getting there. He almost said, you could come. The sentence was right there. He held it back. Not because it wasn't true, but because something about this felt fragile in a way he didn't want to push on yet. Like a door that was open just enough, and he didn't want to knock it off its hinges. I'll find it, he said instead. She opened her book again. He stayed another 20 minutes. Not for any reason. Just stayed, watching the water, listening to the wind work through the pines on the other side. Jasper eventually came back and sat between them again like a small gray referee. When Ethan finally stood to go, Lily looked up from her book. He's going to want to come back tomorrow, she said. She meant the cat. Probably. Yeah, Ethan said. I think he will. He walked back up the path, didn't look back. That part cost him a little more than he expected. Greta's was easy to miss. The name was painted directly on the glass in letters that had faded to almost nothing. No menu outside, no chalkboard, nothing to pull you in. Ethan only found it because he was looking for it. He got a table near the window, ordered the soup. It came out in a thick ceramic bowl, too hot, and he burned his tongue on the first spoonful like an idiot. It was still good, though. Really good, actually. The kind of food that doesn't try to be anything special and ends up being exactly what you needed. He sat there longer than lunch required, watched people pass on the street outside, thought about the lake more than he meant to. The bookstore was on the same block as a hardware store where he stopped for a phone charger. He was coming out when he saw her. She was walking toward him from the other end of the block, carrying a cardboard box with both arms. The kind of carry where you can tell the person underestimated the weight about 30 seconds ago. Let me take that, he said. She looked at him, not startled, just a second of deciding. Then she handed it over. Heavy. Books, he figured out quickly. Just down here, she said. They walked half a block to a store with lilies painted on the window in small letters. She got the door, and he followed her in. It smelled like old paper in there, like a place that had been full of books for a very long time and had stopped trying to smell like anything else. The shelves went up higher than made sense, and there was a rolling ladder on a track along one wall. A fat orange cat was asleep on a chair in the back corner and opened one eye when Ethan came in, decided he wasn't worth the effort, and closed it again. That's Mabel, Lily said. She's rude to everyone. Comforting. He put the box on the counter where she pointed. She thanked him. No ceremony, just thanks, and started opening it. He should have left. He had a 2 o'clock on the north end of the parcel. He had 3 unread emails from his attorney, and he'd already used up whatever excuse had gotten him through that door. But he looked around the store instead of leaving. There were handwritten notes tucked into the shelves. Small ones, index cards mostly, with things like slow start, worth it, or read this after the other one. Not marketing, just notes. Like she was talking to whoever picked up the book. You write all of these? He asked. Yeah. You've read all of them? She glanced around. Most, still working through the back corner. He picked up a book near him, put it back without reading the cover. How long have you been here? I own it, she said. Like that answered the question, which it kind of did. He looked at her. You said you worked at a bookstore. I do work at it. She didn't seem to find this complicated. I also own it. Bought it when I was 26. The woman who had it before was done. He thought about how he introduced himself. Development, acquisitions, square footage, and projected returns. He always led with the size of things. He'd never thought about why until right then, standing in a small bookstore on a quiet street in Minnesota. Mabel had relocated from the chair to the top of a nearby shelf and was staring at him like he owed her something. "I should get going," Ethan said. "Okay. Site visit. You mentioned." He didn't move for another second. "The soup was good, by the way. You were right." She looked up from the box. "I know," she said, completely serious. He wasn't expecting that. He laughed. Just a short thing, caught off guard. And she smiled a little and went back to unpacking. He walked out onto the sidewalk and stood there in the cold for a moment. The street was quiet. A truck went by. Somewhere down the block, a door opened and closed. He had a 2 o'clock. He started walking toward his car. The whole way there, he was already thinking about tomorrow morning, about whether she'd be at the lake, about what he'd say when she asked how the site visit went. He was thinking about it more than the site visit itself. That probably meant something. He'd been in Harlow 6 days. The parcel situation had gotten genuinely complicated. The zoning board wanted a revised impact study before they'd move on anything, which meant at least another week, maybe 2. His project manager had offered to fly up and handle it. Ethan told him he'd stay. He didn't examine that decision too closely. Duncan in the mornings had developed a pattern without either of them agreeing to one. He'd show up at the lake around 8, sometimes 8:30. Lily would already be there, coffee in hand, usually reading. Jasper would go straight to her, and that would be that. They'd sit for an hour, sometimes longer, talking about nothing in particular or not talking at all. It was the not talking that surprised him most. Ethan spent most of his life filling silence. Meetings, calls, dinners with investors. There was always something to say, always a next point to make. He'd gotten so good at it that silence had started to feel like something was wrong, like a gap that needed closing. With Lily, it was different. She'd just sit there reading or watching the water and not seem to need anything from him, and somehow that made him not need anything either. He'd just be there, which sounds simple but wasn't for him. Thursday she asked him about Chicago, not in a probing way, just conversation. What it was like, whether he liked it there. "I like that things happen fast," he said. "I've always liked that." "Do you need them too?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you actually need it, or is it just what you got used to?" He didn't answer right away. The question sat there between them, and she didn't try to help him with it, just waited, watching the water. "I don't know," he said finally. "Honestly." She nodded like that was a fine answer. He thought about it for the rest of the morning. Friday, she had to open the store early and wasn't at the lake. He walked down anyway, sat on the bench with Jasper, and stayed for 40 minutes looking at the water by himself. It was fine. The lake was the same lake. It wasn't the same. He ended up at the bookstore around 11, told himself he needed something to read at the hotel, which was true, technically. She was behind the counter helping a woman who was trying to find a book she couldn't remember the name of, only that the cover was blue and someone had died in it. Lily asked 3 questions and came back with 2 options. The woman took both. He browsed until the store emptied out a bit. Picked up a few things, read the backs, put most of them down. "You're a terrible browser," Lily said from across the room. She hadn't looked up. "How can you tell? You read the back cover in about 4 seconds. You're not actually deciding. You're just doing something with your hands." He looked at the book in his hands. "Put it down. What would you recommend?" She came around the shelves, looked him over for a second like she was doing some kind of calculation, then went to a section near the window and pulled something out without hesitating. She handed it to him. He read the back. "This doesn't seem like something I'd like." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm recommending it." He bought it, partly because she'd said that, partly because he was curious whether she was right. That evening at the hotel, he opened it, planning to read a chapter or 2, and looked up 2 hours later with the lamp on, and the room dark around him and the book half done. He texted her, then stopped, realized he didn't have her number. He sat with that for a minute, the small specific frustration of wanting to tell someone something and not being able to. He hadn't felt that in a while. He'd been living in a way where if he wanted to reach someone, he could. Assistants, contacts, people who picked up on the first ring. Lily didn't even know he'd wanted to text her. She was probably asleep or reading or sitting in whatever her evenings looked like, and he had no idea what they looked like, realized he wanted to. He put the book on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. 6 days. He'd known her 6 days. It didn't feel like 6 days. It felt like something that had been going on longer, quietly, in the background, before he'd noticed it was happening. Jasper jumped onto the bed and walked across his chest and settled near his feet. "Yeah," Ethan said, to no one. He asked for her number the next morning. Not smoothly. He'd been sitting on the bench for 20 minutes, Jasper between them as usual, and there was a pause in the conversation, and he just said it. "Can I get your number? I wanted to text you something last night and realized I couldn't." She looked at him. "What did you want to text?" "You were right about the book." Something moved across her face, pleased but trying not to show it too much. She took his phone and typed her number in, and handed it back without making anything of it. He made a note to himself not to make anything of it either. He mostly succeeded. That afternoon he called his project manager and got an update on the zoning situation. 2 weeks minimum, possibly 3. The revised impact study had to go through 2 separate offices and one of them was backlogged. He told Marcus he'd handle it from here. Marcus was quiet for a second. "You want to stay in Harlow for 3 weeks? The study needs oversight." Another pause. "Okay. You need me to send anything up?" "Just the revised site files. I'll manage the rest." He hung up and sat in his car in the parking lot near the lake and looked at the trees for a minute. 3 weeks was a long time to be in a town of 4,000 people, on the basis of a zoning study he could technically supervise remotely. He started the car and went back to the hotel. On Saturday, she wasn't at the lake in the morning and didn't answer when he texted around 9. He remembered she'd mentioned the animal shelter. "Saturdays," she'd said. He didn't text again. Around noon, she sent back, "Sorry, crazy morning. One of the dogs got out." "Everyone's fine." He wrote back, "The dog or the humans?" A minute later, "Both. Dog mostly." He smiled at his phone like an idiot and put it face down on the desk. She invited him to the shelter that afternoon, not in a formal way. She texted that she was heading back there to help with afternoon feeding if he wanted to see the place. He went. He wasn't sure what he expected, but it wasn't what he found. Maybe 30 animals. Dogs mostly. A few cats in a back room. All of them loud and messy and completely themselves. Lily moved through it like she knew every one of them, which she did. She knew their names and their histories and which ones needed more time before they'd trust you and which ones would climb you the second you walked in. He followed her around, feeling slightly useless. At some point, a large brown dog with one ear that stood up and one that didn't pushed his whole head into Ethan's stomach and just stayed there leaning. "That's Bernard," Lily said. "He does that. Just stands there. He likes pressure. Makes him feel safe." Ethan put his hand on the dog's back. Bernard sighed deeply like this was the best thing that had happened all week. "How long has he been here?" Ethan asked. Lily's expression shifted a little. 8 months. He looked at Bernard. Bernard looked at nothing in particular, content. "He's hard to place," she said. "He's big. He's older. He needs someone patient." She paused. "He's a good dog, though. Really good." Ethan didn't say anything. Just stood there with his hand on Bernard's back while the dog leaned and sighed and asked for nothing except exactly what he was getting. They left around 4. The air outside felt colder after the warmth of the shelter. They walked to their cars, parked near each other without having planned it, and she stopped and turned up her collar against the wind. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I didn't do much. You stood there with Bernard for 20 minutes. That counts." He thought about that on the drive back, how little it had taken to matter to that dog. Just showing up, just being still, just letting him lean. He'd spent 15 years building things that were worth something on paper. Square footage and returns and portfolios that his accountant described with a satisfaction that bordered on emotional. He wasn't sure any of it had ever felt like those 20 minutes. That was the thought he couldn't shake for the rest of the evening. Sitting alone in the hotel room, the book on the nightstand, the town quiet outside the window. He picked up his phone, texted Lily. "Bernard's a good dog." She wrote back fast, like she'd been waiting for it. "I know. I've been saying that for 8 months. Then, after a second, "Glad you saw it too." He read that twice, put the phone down, looked at the ceiling. Something was happening, and he knew it, and he wasn't doing anything to stop it, which was new for him. Ethan Caldwell stopped things. He assessed situations, identified risk, made decisions early before they got complicated. He wasn't doing any of that. He was just letting it happen. For maybe the first time in his adult life, he was just letting something happen. It rained for 3 days straight. Not dramatic rain, just the steady gray kind that settles in over Minnesota in late October. and makes everything smell like wet leaves and cold dirt. The lake disappeared behind it. The bench was soaked. Ethan stayed at the hotel and worked and ordered food from the 2 places in town that delivered and talked to Lily on the phone instead. That part happened naturally. First night, it was a text that turned into a longer back and forth that turned into her just calling because it was easier. They talked for an hour and a half about nothing particularly important. A book she was rereading, a problem with the zoning map his team had found, whether the diner on Route 9 was better than Greta's. She said no. He said he hadn't been yet. She said that was a mistake he should correct. He was getting a picture of her life in pieces. The bookstore took most of her mornings and some of her afternoons. She cooked at home most nights. Nothing complicated. She'd tried a garden 2 years ago and killed everything except one stubborn tomato plant that she described with genuine pride. She read more than anyone he'd ever met and remembered everything she read. Not just plots, but specific sentences. The way something was phrased. Why it mattered. She asked questions like she actually wanted the answers. Not the kind of questions that were really just waiting for their turn to talk. She'd ask something and then go quiet and let him think. He wasn't used to that. The second night, she asked about his family. He told her the basics. Parents in Phoenix, retired. His dad had been in construction, which was probably where he'd gotten the real estate thing from without realizing it. One younger sister in Seattle who called on his birthday and sometimes in between. Nothing broken, nothing dramatic. Just a family that had spread out and gotten busy and stayed in touch enough to feel okay about not being closer. Do you wish it was different? She asked. Sometimes. He was lying on the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, which had become his talking to Lily position without him deciding on it. My sister and I were close when we were kids. That thing where you lose track of it. I don't know exactly when it happened. You could find it again. Maybe. She's got 2 kids now. Her life is full. Full lives still have room, Lily said. You just have to actually try. He didn't answer right away. Sorry, she said. That was direct. No, you're right. I know you're right. He paused. I'm better at starting things than maintaining them. She was quiet for a second. That's an honest thing to say about yourself. I've had a lot of hotel ceilings to think on. She laughed at that. The real one. The short one he'd started listening for. The third day, the rain let up around 4 in the afternoon. She texted, Lake. He was there in 15 minutes. Jasper got out of the carrier before Ethan had fully set it down and was on the bench beside her before she'd even finished sitting. The air smelled like everything that had been rained on for 3 days. The lake was darker than usual, the surface still unsettled. Lily had brought 2 coffees this time and held one out when he sat down. He took it. Thanks. The bench is a little wet still. It's fine. They sat there drinking coffee and not saying much, and it occurred to him that just this wet bench and cold coffee and a gray cat between them, was the part of his day he'd been looking forward to since he woke up. Not the call with the zoning office at 10, not the revised site files Marcus had sent, not any of it. Just this. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. After your parents, you came back here alone. You were what, 22? 23, she said. And you just stayed, built it here, by yourself. She looked at the water. I didn't really think of it that way. This was home. The bookstore came up. One thing led to another. You weren't scared? She turned and looked at him directly, which she did sometimes. This full, straightforward look that he'd learned meant she was about to say something real. I was scared all the time, she said. I just didn't have the option of letting it stop me. He held that. You lost them both at once? He asked. He'd never asked directly. Car accident. I was 19. She said it plainly, not performing the pain of it, just stating it. I had my aunt for a while. Then I didn't. Then it was just me. I'm sorry. I know. She turned back to the lake. It made me good at being alone, which is mostly useful and occasionally a problem. He looked at her profile. The way she said that, occasionally a problem, like she'd thought about it a lot and made some kind of peace with it that wasn't quite complete. He understood that more than he expected to. Same, he said quietly. She glanced over. Something passed between them. Not a moment exactly, just a recognition. 2 people who'd each built a life around not needing too much from anyone else, sitting on a wet bench on a lake, figuring out slowly that maybe that had been the plan and not necessarily the preference. Jasper stood up, turned a full circle for no reason, and sat back down. Lily smiled at him. He does that when he's comfortable, Ethan said. I know, she said. He's been doing it since day 2. Ethan looked at the cat, then at the lake. Lily. Yeah. I'm glad the zoning study got complicated. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, quietly, me too. The lake went dark at the edges where the light was fading. Neither of them moved. He kissed her on a Tuesday. No build-up, no planned moment. They were standing outside the bookstore after she'd locked up for the night, both of them in coats, the street quiet around them. They'd had dinner at Greta's, just dinner, nothing arranged about it. She'd texted him when she was closing up and asked if he'd eaten, and he hadn't. They'd sat there for 2 hours and the place had emptied out around them without either of them noticing. Outside afterward, she was saying something about a book she wanted to order for the store, and he was listening, and then he just did it, stepped forward and kissed her, brief and simple, and pulled back. She looked at him. Sorry, he said. Reflex. Don't apologize for that, she said. He kissed her again, longer this time. Her hand came up to his jacket and held on a little, and the street was completely quiet and cold, and it was the most uncomplicated he'd felt in longer than he could track. They pulled apart, and she looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, like she was deciding something, running some internal calculation he wasn't allowed to see. Okay, she said finally. Okay, he said back. They stood there another minute. Then she said goodnight and walked to her car, and he stood on the sidewalk and watched her go and felt something in his chest that he didn't try to name because naming it felt premature and also because he was pretty sure he knew what it was. The next morning at the lake she was already there, and when he sat down she handed him a coffee and didn't make anything of the night before, and he was grateful for that. They were good at not making things into more than they needed to be. It was one of the things about her he'd noticed early and kept noticing. Jasper walked directly onto her lap and lay down flat, which was new. He's escalating, Ethan said. I don't mind. I know, that's why he does it. She smiled at the cat. He watched her do that and felt something simple and good and slightly terrifying. That his sister called that week. He'd texted her a few days earlier. Nothing big, just checking in. The kind of text he usually put off until it became a phone call he also put off. She'd called back on a Thursday morning while he was walking the path to the lake. He picked up and stopped walking. They talked for 40 minutes, longer than they'd talked in probably 2 years. She told him about the kids, about her husband's new job, about a trip they were planning. He told her about Harlow, just the project at first, then more than that. His sister was quiet for a second when he mentioned Lily. How long have you been there? She asked. Almost 3 weeks. For a zoning study. It's complicated zoning. Ethan. What? Nothing. He could hear her smiling. Nothing at all. Tell me about her. He did. Not everything. Just the shape of it. The lake, the bookstore, the way she talked. His sister listened without interrupting, which she was good at when she wanted to be. She sounds real, his sister said, when he was done. What does that mean? It means she sounds like a real person, not a type, not a category. He thought about that. He'd dated people in Chicago who fit categories, driven, polished, the kind of people who moved through the same world he did and understood its rhythms. He'd never thought of it that way before, as a category. But his sister wasn't wrong. Lily didn't fit any category he had. Yeah, he said. She's real. That Saturday they drove out to a state park 20 minutes north of Harlow. Her idea. She'd mentioned it a few days earlier. A trail along the ridge that was worth doing before the snow came. And it was already mid-November, which meant the window was closing. He'd said yes without thinking about it. It was a cold, clear day, the kind of day where the sky was so blue it looked fake. The trail went up through birch trees that had lost most of their leaves, the ground covered in yellow, the lake visible through the gaps in the trees below them. They walked mostly side by side when the path allowed it, single file when it didn't, Jasper and his carrier on Ethan's back because they'd both agreed at the last second to bring him, and neither of them had examined that decision. Halfway up she stopped at a gap in the trees where you could see the full valley below, the lake, the town, the fields beyond it, going pale in the November light. There, she said. He stood beside her and looked. He'd seen better views. He'd stood on rooftops in Manhattan and balconies in Vancouver, and a hilltop in Tuscany that a client had wanted to show him. He'd appreciated all of them the way you appreciated things that were technically impressive. This was different. He wasn't sure if it was the view or just who he was standing next to. Jasper made a sound from the carrier, not distressed, just present, letting them know he was watching too. Lily laughed softly. He has opinions about everything. He does. She was quiet for a moment. looking at the valley. The wind moved her hair across her face and she pushed it back with one hand and didn't seem to notice she'd done it. "What happens when the zoning study is done?" she asked. The question was quiet. No weight in her voice, no accusation, just asking. He'd been thinking about it for days without getting anywhere useful. Chicago was Chicago, his office, his team, 15 years of something he'd built from nothing. He couldn't just not go back. He knew that. He also knew that the thought of leaving felt different than it would have a month ago. "I don't know yet," he said. "Honestly." She nodded, kept looking at the valley. "That's a fair answer," she said. It wasn't a resolution. Neither of them pretended it was. But she'd asked the thing that needed asking, and he hadn't flinched from it, and they stayed there another few minutes looking at the view before heading back down the trail. Her hand found his on the way down. He held on. Neither of them said anything about it. They didn't need to. He got the call on a Monday morning. Marcus, his project manager. The zoning board had scheduled a hearing for the revised impact study, 2 weeks out, which meant Ethan needed to be in Chicago before then to prepare. There were also 2 other deals that had been sitting on hold while he was in Harlow, things his team had been managing but that needed him physically present to move forward. It was the call he'd known was coming. He'd known for a while. He sat in the car after and looked at the lake through the windshield for a few minutes. The water was darker now, November settling in for real, the birch trees on the far bank stripped bare. In a few weeks there'd be snow. He went to find Lily. She was at the bookstore behind the counter doing something with invoices. Mabel was on the counter beside her, which Mabel apparently did now when the store was quiet. Ethan had become familiar enough with the place that the bell above the door didn't make either of them look up immediately. Then Lily looked up and read his face and set down her pen. "When?" she asked. "End of the week. Thursday probably." She nodded slowly. "How long?" "I don't know. A few weeks at least. The hearing, then the other deals." He paused. I'm not disappearing. I want to be clear about that." She looked at him steadily. "I know. I just don't want to—" "Ethan." She said it the way she sometimes said his name, quiet and direct. "I know. It's okay." He came to the counter and she moved the invoices aside and he sat on the stool on the customer side. Mabel looked at him with her standard contempt and relocated to a shelf. "I've been thinking about what you asked," he said. "On the trail." She waited. "I don't have a clean answer yet. I'm not going to pretend I do." He looked at his hands on the counter. "But I know that whatever I figure out, it involves coming back here. That part I'm sure about." She was quiet for a moment. "You've never done anything halfway," she said. "Have you?" "What makes you say that?" "Everything about you. Not critical, just observational. The way you work, the way you're here every morning, the way you read that book in one sitting and texted me about it at 11 at night." She paused. "You don't do things slowly. I've been slow with this." "I know," she said. "That's how I know it's real." He looked at her. She seemed slightly surprised she'd said it. She picked up her pen and looked at the invoices and then put the pen back down, because they both knew she wasn't going to do invoices right now. "I'm scared too," she said quietly. "Just so you know, I'm not sitting over here completely fine about this." "What are you scared of?" She thought about it honestly, the way she always did. That you'll go back and remember what your real life feels like, and this will become the thing you meant to come back to. The word meant landed the way she probably intended it to. "That's not going to happen," he said. "You don't know that. I know myself well enough. You knew yourself before you came here too." She met his eyes. People change what they think they know. It happens. He didn't argue with it. She wasn't wrong that it happened. He just knew. In the specific way you knew things that had stopped being negotiable somewhere along the line, that she was wrong about this particular case. He reached across the counter and took her hand. She let him. "I'm coming back," he said. "That's not hope. It's a plan. There's a difference." She looked at their hands, then at him. Something in her face shifted, not all the way to convinced, but softer, like she'd decided to let herself believe it part way and see what happened. "Okay," she said. Thursday morning came faster than either of them wanted. He packed the hotel room in 20 minutes. Jasper watched from the bed with an expression of deep skepticism, ears back, tracking every item that went into the bag. "We're coming back," Ethan told him. Jasper did not look reassured. At the lake, Lily was already there, even though it was early and cold enough that her breath showed. She had 2 coffees. He sat beside her and they watched the water and didn't talk much, which felt right. There wasn't a lot that needed saying that hadn't been said. At some point, Jasper climbed off the bench and put both front paws on Lily's knee and looked up at her face with this expression that was hard to watch without feeling something. She picked him up and held him against her chest, and he let her completely, all the usual cat dignity set aside. "He's never done that," Ethan said. "I know." Her voice was slightly uneven when she said it. She held the cat for a few minutes. Ethan sat beside her and looked at the lake and let it be what it was, without trying to make it smaller or more manageable. When he stood to leave, she stood too, and he held her for a moment in the cold morning air with the lake behind them and the bare trees and the sound of the water. "Thursday," she said into his jacket, meaning the next time, the one she'd decided to believe in. "Thursday," he said. He meant it like a promise. He drove out of Harlow with Jasper in the back seat and the town getting smaller in the mirror, and something in his chest that was equal parts full and hollow, the way things felt when they mattered enough that leaving them even temporarily cost you something real. He didn't look away until the town was gone. Chicago felt louder than he remembered. Not just sound, everything. The pace of it, the density, the way the city pushed at you from all directions and expected you to push back. He'd lived there 15 years and never noticed it as noise before. It had just been the texture of his life. He noticed it now. And the first week was meetings, the impact study prep, the 2 deals that had been sitting, a dinner with investors that ran 3 hours and covered everything except anything that mattered. His office was on the 31st floor with a view of the lake, Lake Michigan, wide and gray, nothing like the lake in Harlow except the color on overcast days. He caught himself looking at it between calls. His assistant Elena had left a stack of things on his desk that needed attention, and a note that said, "Welcome back," in a handwriting that suggested she was reserving judgment about how welcome it actually was. He worked through most of it the first day, and the rest the second, and by Thursday had his head back in it enough to function at the level people expected from him. Functioning wasn't the same as being there. He knew the difference now in a way he hadn't before. He and Lily talked every night. Not always long. Sometimes she was tired from a full day at the store, and he was coming off back-to-back calls, and they'd talk for 20 minutes about nothing much. But every night, she'd tell him about the store, a customer who'd come in looking for 1 book and left with 4, a new shipment that had included 3 copies of something she hadn't ordered and couldn't explain. He'd tell her about the deals, stripped of the parts that didn't matter, the parts that were just machinery. She asked good questions, not about the money or the scale, about the decisions, why he'd chosen one approach over another, what he was trying to build, whether he actually liked it or had just gotten good at it. He'd never been asked that last one before. "Both," he said one night. "I think both, but the ratio has shifted." "Toward which side?" "Good at it," he said. "More than I'd like." She was quiet for a second. "That's useful to know." "Is it?" "It means you're paying attention." "Most people aren't." He looked at the ceiling of his apartment, the high ceilings he'd paid a lot for and barely looked at. "What did you figure out about yourself that you didn't expect to?" She thought about it. "That I'm less okay with being alone than I told myself I was." A pause. "I got very good at making it feel like a choice, wasn't it?" "Partly. The first part was a choice. The part after that was just habit dressed up as preference." He stayed with that. He had his own version of it. Different details. Same architecture. Second week he drove back to Harlow on a Wednesday instead of Thursday. He hadn't told her. He just finished what needed finishing, told Elena he'd be reachable by phone, put Jasper in the carrier, and drove the 4.5 hours north. He texted when he was 20 minutes out, "How's the lake this time of day?" A minute passed. Then, "Why?" "Just wondering." Another minute. Then, "You're close, aren't you?" He smiled at the highway. 20 minutes. Her response took a few seconds. "I'll be at the bench." She was there when he came down the path. It had snowed a little, just enough to dust the ground and the bench and the near edge of the lake. She was standing instead of sitting, coat on, hands in her pockets, and she turned when she heard him on the path. He didn't slow down. He walked straight to her, and she met him halfway across the grass, and he held her the way you held someone when you'd been thinking about doing it for 2 weeks and had run out of reasons to wait. She didn't say anything for a moment, just held on. Jasper made a sound from the carrier on Ethan's back, impatient, pointed. She laughed against his shoulder, pulled back and unzipped the carrier, and Jasper stepped out directly onto her arm and climbed up to her shoulder and sat there like a parrot, which he had never done before in his life. "He missed you," Ethan said. "He's on my shoulder." "I noticed." "Did you miss me?" He looked at her. "I drove 4 hours on a Wednesday." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." She smiled. The real one. The full one that she didn't always let out. He'd missed that too. He'd missed all of it. The bench, the lake, the cold, the bookstore, Mabel's contempt, Bernard's leaning, the whole specific texture of being here. They sat on the snowy bench because of course they did, Jasper moving from her shoulder back to the space between them. The lake had a thin skim of ice near the shore that hadn't been there before. The light was doing the low winter thing, flat and pale. The kind of light that made everything look like a photograph of itself. After a while, she said, "How long this time?" He'd been thinking about that in the car, going over it the way he went over decisions that had a lot of variables. The zoning hearing was still a week out. The deals were moving. His team was good. He'd hired them to operate without him standing over them, and they could. "I need to go back for the hearing," he said. "After that, I want to talk to you about something." She looked at him. "That sounds like something." "It is something, but I want to say it properly. Not on a bench in the snow." She looked at the bench, the snow on it, the lake. "I like this bench." "I know you do. I still want to say it somewhere warm." She seemed to accept that. She looked back at the water, and he could see her deciding not to push on it, storing it somewhere to think about later, which was very her. "Okay," she said. The ice near the shore caught the low light and held it for a second, bright and sharp. Jasper pushed himself flat between them and closed his eyes. The town was quiet around them. The cold was the real kind now, the kind that was done being polite about it. And Ethan sat there on a snowy bench next to a woman he hadn't known 6 weeks ago and felt more clearly than he'd felt anything in a long time that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not passing through, not evaluating. Here. The zoning hearing was on a Friday. It went fine. 3 hours. 2 objections from a neighborhood group that his attorney had anticipated and prepared for. A vote at the end that went the way it needed to go. Ethan shook hands in a conference room on the 14th floor and took the elevator down and stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the Chicago cold and felt almost nothing about it. Not because it didn't matter. It did, practically. But he'd been in that hearing room thinking about Harlow and the drive north and the thing he needed to say. He called Elena and told her he'd be out of the office the following week. She didn't ask why this time. He got to Harlow on a Saturday evening. Lily knew he was coming. He'd told her Friday night after the hearing, "Just, I'll be there tomorrow. Is dinner okay?" She'd said yes. He'd driven up in the morning and checked into the hotel and spent the afternoon walking the lake alone, just walking, going over what he wanted to say and how. He'd never been nervous about a conversation before. Not like this. Business negotiations, board presentations, difficult calls. None of it had felt like this. This was different because the outcome wasn't a deal. The outcome was something he couldn't control or structure or prepare for adequately, and he'd had to make peace with that on the drive up. He mostly had. They went to Greta's because it was theirs by now. In the quiet way places became yours without a formal announcement. Same table by the window, same ceramic bowls. The place was fuller than usual for a Saturday, a low murmur of other people's conversations around them. Lily had her hair down and was wearing a dark blue sweater he hadn't seen before, and she looked at him across the table with that expression she had, calm, direct, slightly amused by him in a way she didn't try to hide anymore. They ate and talked about regular things. The store, the zoning result, a book she'd just finished that she couldn't stop thinking about. He listened and asked questions and watched her talk and thought about how he'd spent 15 years in rooms with interesting, accomplished people and could count on one hand the conversations that felt like this. After a while, the food was gone and the table was quiet. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Say the thing." He almost smiled. "I haven't said anything yet." "I know. You've been not saying it all through dinner. Go ahead." He put his hands flat on the table. "I've been thinking about what I want the next part of my life to look like. Not the work. I know what I'm doing with the work. The rest of it." He paused. "I've been thinking about it more clearly than I've thought about anything in a long time, which is either a good sign or a sign that I've lost my mind." "Could be both," she said. "Could be both." He looked at her. "I want to be here. Not visiting. Not checking in between deals. I want to base myself here, in Harlow. I can run the business from anywhere that has a phone and a reasonable internet connection, and I've been pretending otherwise for years because Chicago was what I knew." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to change anything," he said. "The store, your life, the bench, none of that. I'm just telling you what I want so you know where I'm standing." He paused. "And I want to be standing near you. That's the main thing. The window behind him reflected the restaurant, the other tables, the warm light, both of them sitting there. She looked at her hands for a moment, then at him. "You've thought about this," she said, "for weeks. It's not—" She stopped, started again. "It's a big thing to rearrange your life. I know. I don't want you to do it and then resent it later. Resent me later. Lily, I mean it. I've seen that happen. Someone gives something up and it seems fine and then it isn't. I'm not giving anything up," he said. "I'm choosing where to put things. There's a difference." He held her gaze. "You told me that, actually, about being alone. That the first part was a choice and the rest was habit. I've been living in habit for a long time. This is a choice." She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look, let her think, didn't rush it. Outside the window, Main Street was dark and quiet. A light snow had started, small flakes moving sideways in the wind. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. So am I." "You don't seem scared." "I'm terrified," he said. "I'm just not letting it make the decision." Something shifted in her face. Slowly, the way things shifted with her. No sudden movements, no performance. Just a gradual settling, like a decision that had been close to the surface finally coming all the way up. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you believe me, or okay, something else." "Okay, I'm in," she said. "Both things." He turned his hand over and held hers, and the restaurant went on around them, warm and ordinary, and completely unaware that anything significant had just happened at the table by the window. They walked after, because they always walked after. The snow was light enough that it didn't matter much, just enough to make the street look different. The storefronts dusted, the sidewalk soft underfoot. Lily's shoulder was against his arm. Jasper was at the hotel, locked in this time, not taking chances. They stopped outside the bookstore. She found her keys. He stood beside her while she unlocked the door, and then she turned and looked at him in the dark with the snow coming down, and he kissed her and she kissed him back, and it wasn't like the first time. It was something past that, something that knew itself better. She pulled back, looked at him. "You're going to have to do something about that hotel," she said. "I know. Harlow has exactly 2 rental properties and one of them has a mold problem. I'll figure it out." "You always figure it out." "Is that a complaint?" "No," she said. "It's just true." She went inside. He stood on the sidewalk alone for a minute, snow on his shoulders, looking at the dark street. The town was completely quiet. No traffic, no noise, just the snow coming down and the storefronts and a dog barking somewhere 2 blocks over and then stopping. He'd stood in a lot of places in his life and felt the size of what he'd built. This was the first time he'd stood somewhere and felt the size of what he was about to. It felt better. He put his collar up against the cold and walked back toward the hotel, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He already knew. 2 years later, Ethan still couldn't tell you exactly when Harlow stopped feeling like a place he'd chosen and started feeling like home. It wasn't a single moment, more like a series of small things that added up without asking permission. The morning he knew the barista at the coffee shop on Route 9 by name, and she already had his order started when she saw him come through the door. The afternoon he ran into Bernard's new owner at the hardware store, a retired teacher named Cal who'd adopted him in the spring and couldn't stop talking about what a good dog he was, which Ethan already knew. The first real snowfall of the second winter, when he stood at the window of the house and watched it come down over the lake and felt nothing except that it was going to be a good day. The house was on the north side of town, 10 minutes from the bookstore. Old, needed work, the kind of place that had good bones and a history you could feel in the floors. He'd bought it in February, 8 months after moving up from Chicago. Lily had walked through it with him twice before he made an offer, and hadn't said much either time, just moved through the rooms quietly, touching the door frames, looking out the windows. On the way out the second time she'd said the light in the kitchen is good, and he'd called his agent that afternoon. He'd learned to read her that way. What she said and what she meant were usually the same thing, but sometimes the important part was quieter than the words. The development project had taken shape differently than the original plan. He'd scaled it back, not because the numbers didn't work the original way, they would have, but because he'd spent enough time in Harlow to understand what the town actually needed, which wasn't what the initial proposal had assumed. 12 units instead of 40. Income restricted, a third of them. A common space that faced the lake because, why wouldn't it? His investors had questions. He'd answered them and moved forward anyway. Marcus had flown up to see the finished project in September. He'd walked through it and looked at the lake view and been quiet for a moment, then looked at Ethan and said, "You're not coming back to Chicago, are you?" Ethan had said no, and Marcus had nodded once and said okay, and they'd gone to Greta's for lunch and talked about the next project, which was in a small town in Wisconsin, and had been Ethan's idea. He was finding there were a lot of places like Harlow, places that needed someone to pay attention to what was actually there before deciding what to build. Jasper had become improbably a regular fixture at the bookstore. Lily had started bringing him some mornings when Ethan had early calls. He'd taken to sitting in the window display beside whatever arrangement she'd put together, which drew more foot traffic than she admitted. Mabel had reached a cold truce with him that involved assigned territories and no direct eye contact. It mostly held. It's on a Saturday in late October, 2 years and a few weeks after a gray cat had crossed a gravel parking lot and walked down a dirt path toward a lake. Ethan found Lily at the bench. She was there when he came down the path, same as always. Coffee beside her on the wood, book in her hands. The lake was the dark silver of late autumn, the birch trees stripped, the air cold enough to see your breath. Jasper went to her immediately. Ethan sat down. She handed him the coffee without looking up from her book, the way she did now, knowing he'd be there. He took it and looked at the water and felt the particular quiet of a Saturday morning in a place you'd stopped being a visitor to. After a while, she closed the book. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "The house. The back room. What to do with it." He looked at her. They'd been talking about the back room for 3 months without resolving it. It was small, faced the garden, good light in the afternoon. She'd suggested a reading room. He'd suggested an office. Neither of them had pushed hard because neither of them was sure that was really what they were talking about. "What are you thinking?" he said. She looked at the lake, then at him, calm and direct, the way she always was when she'd already made up her mind and was just deciding how to say it. "I think we have time to figure it out," she said. He understood what she meant. He'd understood her for a long time now. "Yeah," he said. "We do." Jasper moved from her side to his lap and back to hers, unable to decide, finally settling across both of them at once the way he'd started doing in the past few months, taking up more space than was strictly reasonable. Neither of them moved him. The lake was still. A pair of ducks came around the near bank and kept going. The cold air smelled like water and pine and the first suggestion of coming snow. Ethan looked at the woman beside him, the bench, the cat, the lake, the town around them, and thought about the evening 2 years ago when a car door had opened and a cat had decided something that he hadn't been smart enough to decide for himself yet. He owed Jasper a lot. He reached over and scratched behind the cat's ears, and Jasper pushed into his hand and purred, low and steady, in the way he did when things were exactly as they should be. Some people spend years building a life and forget to build a place for themselves in it. Ethan had done that. For a long time, he was very good at it. It took a small gray cat, a dirt path, and a woman on a bench to show him the difference. Would you have followed the cat? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments.